author, TV presenter, actor, and man known pretty much throughout the world, as one friend told me, as one of the best loved Englishmen in the world. Michael Palin is with us here today. He has been to the North Pole, the South Pole, through the Sahara, all sorts of exotic places, including the FCC main bar. He's here to tell us about his travels and why he still enjoys it and will keep entertaining us and delighting us for some time to come. It's my honor to introduce an FCC honorary member, Michael Palin.
Thank you, Tara. It's a pleasure to be back here, always is. I haven't been to the bar yet today, so I haven't totally got the flavour of the place. But anyway, it's nice to see old and friendly faces here. Ostensibly, I'm really here this week for two reasons. One, to speak to the Royal Geographical Society, of whom until recently I was president, but also to help open and indeed support the exhibition at the Maritime Museum of the work of Basil Powell. Basil, yes, round of applause there. Not you, Basil, they must applaud, not you. Anyway, Basil and I go back 25 years. It started in, our working relationship started here in Hong Kong, so it's great to be back to do that. But and it opens this evening at the Maritime Museum. I'll be there, maybe some of you will as well. It runs for 2 weeks, so rush and tell all your friends to go there and see spectacular photographs. Today I'm going to do something a little bit different, just to prove that I do travel occasionally without Basil. It's not quite the same. I mean, it's going with my wife, but still, I do travel. And about 2 years ago, in 2011, I was working on a novel called The Truth, which is here. There. I was going to read from it, but no time. And The Truth is really, briefly, the story is about a disillusioned journalist. I know that's a totally fictional character, but then there must be some somewhere. Who gets, via a rather dodgy publisher, a chance to write a book about a man he regards as a great hero, who's a great environmental operator, goes around the world, no one ever knows where he is or where he lives or anything like that. But he organizes, fights for tribal rights against big business, all that sort of thing. And he writes this wonderful book about him, and it's just for him a joy. At last he's got something he really wants to write about. Then he delivers the book to the publishers, and the publishers say, no, we can't publish this. This is all too nice. You like this guy. We want the dirt. And so it's about all sorts of things, about modern publishing and what the truth is and where it comes from and how it's best sort of captured. Anyway, in the course of the novel, I had to have somewhere which was a sort of flashpoint in the world where this environmental traveller might operate. And I had heard via the Royal Geographical Society of a big aluminium mine in India, on the you see the map here, in Orissa, now called Odisha actually, but I'll refer to it as Orissa because that's the more familiar name. And this huge plant had been working for about 10 years, wanted to extract bauxite from the local area. The bauxite lay under the hills called the Niyamgiri Hills, which were sacred hills to the original Adivasis, the original population of India, been there for thousands of years. This was their sacred hill, and they were supported by a number of groups who said, you can't just rip their hills apart for this aluminium plant. So I thought, well, that sounds interesting. I'll go there and I'll get some sort of background, and then I can weave this into a totally fictional story. But anyway, as I'm going to show you today, I went there and suddenly found the story was right there under my nose. And forgive this, none of the photos are by Basil Powell. They're all taken by Michael Palin. So please, I don't have an exhibition at the Maritime Museum, but still, we're here today. So excuse the quality, they're not the best. This was actually my globe at home. I took a snap of it, and it shows you, oh dear, sorry, I think I've gone wrong already. Oh, no, there we are. Anyway, India and its it's the northeast coast of India. Unfortunately, my globe doesn't have the capital of Orissa. It has everything else, but not the capital of Orissa. It's sort of up there, and it's called Bhubaneswar. And I went, that's where I started my week's journey, fact-finding journey. There we are, that's a better map. That shows Bhubaneswar there on the Mahandia River, and it's where recently they had quite serious storms out there. But Bhubaneswar is well known, as my guide told me, for the number of temples. The guide didn't seem too keen to take me into the interior, but he did want me to see a lot of temples. And they are very beautiful. This one is about 1,500 years old, and I think it's called the Duel, the main sort of tower there. And they were adding bits on. And originally, the area around Bhubaneswar was Buddhist, and it was a kingdom of a king called Ashoka. And then there was in about 600 AD, the Hindu sort of population fought back, and it became Hindu. But originally, there were Buddhist, there are Buddhist and indeed Hindu influences in the temples here. Here, just rather wonderful little panels you see, beautifully carved. Again, I say this is about 1,500 years old, and it has depictions of flowers and animals and all that sort of thing, but also these rather beautiful sort of dancers, very lithe, very beautifully sculptured when you consider how old the buildings are. And this rather wonderful site, which is a fight, I think, between a sort of court elephant on one side and a wild elephant on the other, who's obviously sort of rather turned on by the sight of the elephant with the lovely headdress and all that, and this men fighting to keep the elephants apart. And I love the fact that they're sort of, the figure in the background, there's actually using the panel itself to sort of hold him in. And again, I think that's over 1,000 years old, and I can't remember what was being produced in Britain at that time, but certainly nothing near as elaborate and sort of kinetic and exciting as that. So the temple is rather beautiful there. A lot more of them in Bhubaneswar. There were 1,500 temples at one time. This is my guide told me. They said there are 1,500 temples here, Mr. Palin, but sadly there are only 500 left. And that was I was only going to be there a day, but so he took me around all the various temples. Again, here you see a motif that occurs quite a lot, which is the cowering elephant and the lion, or in this case, I think it might even be a camel or a horse, rearing on top of it. And that was supposed to show, some people think, the domination of Hindu over Buddhist. That's wonderful. Actually, I've got my script here. I can tell you exactly what that is. That's called a Torana. That's a gateway arch. That's about the 10th century. So that's about 900 AD. Again, a beautifully elaborate piece of work. Anyway, eventually we got on the road. I'd seen the temples, and we were heading for the interior of Orissa. And we went down the coast, and on the way, you have to stop at gift shops. People are selling you things, and applique is very, very, it's a big thing here. So they have lots of lamps, cloth, fabric, all decorated with applique. Workshops like this. I wasn't really interested in that. I just went down a side street and found a house like this, a much more traditional house. Rice powder paintings on the walls. These are traditional at harvest time. You sort of paint these on the walls to celebrate the fertility of the harvest. And these kind of houses, they're rammed earth walls and thatch, as you see. These are fairly common throughout Orissa, which is one of the poorest of the Indian states. And I just put this in because we went to a restaurant. I said, oh, this is a very good restaurant. I said, oh, I see it's called Toilet Complex. There was no sign of the restaurant at all, but just this huge sign saying Toilet Complex. So I thought it might be interesting to any psychiatrists amongst you. But it did have, yes, it did have facilities there. Nearby on the beach, rather interesting, the fishermen are not from Orissa. They're from a state further south, Andhra Pradesh, because the Aryan Hindus of the northern part of India are scared of the sea. The people are rather frightened. They just think the ocean goes on forever until you drop off the end. So they don't like going to sea. They don't like setting out. So the Dravidian Indians, more from the south, are the ones who do the fishing. And so they've moved up into Orissa, and they bring the fish in here on the beach. The boats are incredibly heavy. The beaches are flat, so they just have to pick them up and have to carry them in. You can see here about sort of 20 men to carry each boat. It's a terrific amount of physical labor as the boats come in. And then the fish are unloaded, and the women take the fish to the market and get some money for it. So it's a fairly basic existence there. They don't make a lot of money, but it is, as I say, the Dravidians from Andhra Pradesh who do the fishing there. This is a big temple at Karnak, and once again you see here this motif of the elephant submitting, just about to see it, the elephant submitting to the lion. And this is again, elephants, dancing girls, music, very, very important motifs there. A lot of these temples are celebration and all that, and a lot of sex actually, but they're rather higher up, so I wasn't able to get my zoom lens in there. Here we are down below. The Sun Temple is basically set up in the form of a chariot. It has 12 huge wheels. These represent the months of the year. They divided off, and this was all built, I think, in the sort of 13th century, and it's a huge complex. I say great stone chariots, and that is at a place called, yes, that's also at Karnak, at the Sun Temple at Karnak. Built in 13th century, World Heritage Site, 1,200 masons, took 16 years to build it. So that's I say, one of the greatest, probably the greatest temple in that part of the country. And the chariot is very much a part of religious observance there, and on festival days they have these enormous wooden chariots that are pulled through the streets, again by enormous number of men. There's a great deal of physical labor required here. There are no motors on these things. So here we go now. We're going inland from, we've come down here at Brahmapur. We're going to go up to there, which is the end of the yellow line, which is Lanjigar, which is where the aluminium plant operated by a company called Vedanta was set up. And this is what I wanted to see. I just wanted to see what it was like, what the land was like there, what effect it had on the people there. So we struck inland. Again, it's a very rural, very poor, very agricultural area. Here you can see the men threshing the rice onto granite blocks, and the houses and the villages very much like the one I saw earlier, rammed earth with a bit of stonework as a frame, and thatched houses. A rather peaceful, pleasant way of life. Here's they have this rather nice thing when there's marriage ceremonies. They just paint the wall. They sort of paint the walls. So here, Tansi weds Malaya, and wedding and all that. So gives you a little idea of what's gone on in that house. Here there's my guide on the right there, and on the left my driver, and this is Government Guest House number 37, which was really a bit of Basil Fawlty-like, and almost everything went wrong. The lights and the aircon wouldn't work at the same time, so you had to have one or the other. So there's a lot of rushing around and banging into things, so they didn't quite get the timing quite right. Anyway, nearby there's this extraordinary shrine, and there's a little fountain there, which is a sacred fountain. People come to wash, and also the goddess Kali here, the avenging goddess, who looks really terrifying. I mean, you certainly wouldn't want to meet her. Even in the bar of the FCC, it'd probably be a bit of a surprise. But she is a defender of goodness. She is Shiva's consort, and she just frightens people who are bad people. So very, very useful, actually, in business, Kali, and very much revered in this part of the world, one of the many gods. I remember my guide saying to me as I first got to Bhubaneswar, he was always asking me questions which he knew I wouldn't know the answer to, and then he'd laugh at me. So he said, "How many gods do you think there are in India?" And I said, "Oh, well, 10, 12, 350 million, because each family has its own god." So I got that wrong. I got almost everything. He would set me up and say, "You know, this building has a trident on the top. Why is that?" because it's near the sea. No, 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 because it is God Vishnu. No. So I was learning in this rather strange way as I went through the journey. This goddess Agni, the goddess of the god of fire, who has 3 legs, as you can see. And I'm not quite sure why he does, but I think he has 3 separate kingdoms. So there's certainly a great awareness of the gods and the heritage of the gods in this part of India. This is now into a more secular world. Very interesting. On a building here, you see on the left Subhas Chandra Bose, who was the great leader during the Second World War of the Indian National Army, which was set up to defeat the British, basically, and made alliances with the Japanese, and the British didn't like that at all, especially as he'd been educated at Cambridge. So he died rather mysteriously in an airplane crash in 1945. The man who, of course, eventually got the British out of India, not one of the men, but certainly one of the most significant on the right there is Gandhi, who used peaceful methods as opposed to Chandra Bose, who, as I said, had recruited his own army, the Indian National Army, in the war. These great trucks you see all the time, and nowadays, sort of back home, probably here as well, there are so many safety things you have to have if you're putting any vehicle on the road. And it's all got to be very streamlined. Whereas here it's completely the opposite. You can make the front of your vehicle look like a theatre and just drape bits of festoons of streamers and everything anywhere. Just got to celebrate the fact you're on the road, probably in a slightly dodgy vehicle. Again, the area is quite poor as you come up into the hills. Those are the local people. These would be the lowest of the low, really. These are Dalits. They don't sort of belong to any of the castes, but they are the sort of the poorest people. And you do see a lot of them in Orissa as we go along the road. Very friendly to us they were, but as I say, you see their houses and their buildings are fairly poor, although that one, the building there, probably provided by the government. This is rather interesting. There's a great deal of sort of political activity in Orissa from the Naxalites, who are in fact Maoists. And in India they're called Naxalites after a village, Naxale, where they first grew up. And they're basically against modern business, against modern progress. They have their own political agenda, was that they should rule the villages in sort of cadres, very much of sort of the old Maoist. They have a lot of the old Maoist dogma. And this is a memorial here to 3 of the fallen, 3 people who were killed by the army. It's a continual problem in Orissa and in the states further south. They are very active. They take over villages. They are armed. The villagers don't particularly like them, but they offer some kind of security. The army's attempts to try and wrest these villages away from the Naxalites have been largely unsuccessful, and they've lost quite a number of men, so the fight still goes on. And oddly enough, here in the background, you see a number of things, because you can see the power lines going across. Now, the power lines here are really not much for the local people. These power lines are for the Nanjigar aluminium factory, because to make aluminium is incredibly expensive. You need an enormous amount of energy, and 70% of the energy running along through Orissa is going to this one plant. So you're seeing there the people who actually have blown up several of these pylons in the past because they don't like big business, and also the pylons themselves still there and the plant still, as I'm to see later, operating. There are the 3 martyrs. Sago palms you see a lot. They make a sort of palm wine out of these trees, and you just tap them, rather like rubber tapping. But in fact, you can get something like 10 litres a day out of each tree, and it makes quite a nice, pleasant little drink. Not terribly strong, but perfectly good at the end of a long day. These are nuts being sort of dried out. Again, this is now, I would say, within about 50 miles of the plant. And the people here in this village, there's a lady there with her little grandson, I assume it's her grandson, and a cow next door to her. Little family there, the man with this wonderful instrument, which he's showing us how to play. Then back onto the road, getting nearer towards the mine. There's something you just see on the roadside, people carrying their own crops, the straw, the thatch. This man, sort of wiry man, carrying a very, very heavy load. And suddenly, first thing I really saw, first glimpse of big business, we're around the corner, and you see these, a huge convoy of turbines destined for the Lanjagar plant. They can't move except at night because they fill up the whole road. But there was kind of ominous feeling of this is really what the area is all about, not men carrying their own straw. Here's a railway line that they are building their own railway link to the main line so that they can get the aluminium in and out. And just a bit of background is that the mine was originally licensed by the local government, I think about 2004, but there was absolute rule that they were not to expand unless they sought permission. And it was quite clearly that expansion was exactly what this place is all about. The bauxite was going to be taken from those hills, whether people liked it or not. Otherwise, they wouldn't have built all this superstructure, because without the local bauxite, they wouldn't have been able to expand. So everything you see here, the railway sleepers for the new railway track, is really evidence of the fact that the plant is going to increase in size. And this is the first glimpse of the hills themselves. You can see them in the background there. They're not spectacular, not high hills, but over the other side are the villages of the Dongria Khond, about 8,000 people, who, as I say, have lived there for thousands of years. And this is a clear indication that they are going to extract the bauxite, because it's a conveyor belt stretching up towards the mountains. And this is the front of the plant. This is the Vedanta plant, all very smooth and space-agey, very smart. Actually, behind the scenes, the workers all live in porter cabins in rather sort of less glamorous circumstances. And this is what's left of the little village of Lanjagar, rather fine old house, the local Raja, now falling into disrepair, sort of symbol of the old world being sort of overtaken by new life. There's a rather nice magnolia tree in the middle of the courtyard. It's got its own temples with the jagamanas, the tall thing. And here is the first glimpse of the Dongria Khond. It was difficult to get to the villages, and certainly to get right up to the village I'm going to show you in a moment, because they don't like foreigners going there. If you're from the West, they regard you as being part of the company. And so they don't really like you, and they don't particularly like you taking photographs at all. So I just had to snatch these photos when I could. These are women from the village, would have walked probably about 9 or 10 kilometers to come and sell fruit, which they grow, and wood in the village in return for water and drink and things like that. A number of girls here, you can see that they're particularly important part of their decoration of the sort of little bracelet, the things they put in their hair clips and all that, nose rings, beautiful bits of jewellery on their and bracelets and bangles as well. They're waiting before going on back up to the village. There's no transport there, they have to walk all the time. And this is the plant, which again, difficult to photograph. We weren't encouraged to get too near and photograph it. But you can see it's a big plant, springs out of nowhere, and this is quite clear evidence that more smelters are being built. And they can see a group of local people walking around the plant. They can't walk across the land they used to, obviously, because it's fenced off, not just fenced off, this enormous wall built to keep them out. And again, there another shot of the building of the smelters. And I heard later that they actually were planning to increase the production of the plant sixfold, again, without permission. So it's going to be 6 times as much aluminium produced. And there it is, sitting in the midst of what was paddy fields at the time. And I have to say, you know, the local government are very much behind this plant. They support it. It provides local labour. It also provides income for the state and all that. It's just that the Indian government itself was very sceptical of the company and the way it had flaunted certain restrictions. So there was a bit of a ambivalence here between the local Orissa government and the Indian government, who are much more on the case. So this is the little village where we started from to go up, to walk up into the Nirmgiri Hills. Just you see these wonderful snacks available on the street. There's a man with a coffee machine, the hand blower you see he has there that sort of heats it all up, and the coffee's all made in this great big saucepan. So it tastes rather odd, but very, very sweet. But there it is. They're very friendly in the village, and we walk up through this rather lovely, pristine forest to where the Dongria Khond live. There we are. You can see a banana plantation on the left. They do grow things. They look after the forest. Obviously, they must have done. They've lived there for over 2,000 years, and they know how to husband the forest, and they can produce most of their own fruit and vegetables, and they have some to sell as well. Dry season and the wet season, there will be plenty of water coming down this course. Life is fairly different. Apparently they take quite a long time to chop down trees there. Anyone who goes by has a go at it with their Swiss Army knife, and after about a few months it falls over. So you can just see the nick on the tree there. And this is a first glimpse of the village, and of course, as you can see, it's perfectly ordinary. There's nothing particularly special about it. A mixture of tin roofs, thatched roofs, and you can see the hills going up behind the big mango trees there, and mango trees. And we were up there. Most of the men had left. They'd gone down to the market, or they were gathering wood in the forest. Very, very hot part of the world, so the roofs come right down, right over the front of the building to offer shade, and not many people there. But here's one of the houses. Again, they use this very delicate rice powder decoration, and you see it round the door there. And here's some of the younger members of the Dongria Khond who were outside their houses there. Again, you can see the exquisite work they use in the sort of the rings and the hair clips and fabric in the ears and all that. And they don't do a great deal during the day, and one could say, well, maybe it's much better for them if life did change and they'd get an education and all that sort of thing. But all I would say is, having seen what the workers were living in, the conditions they were living in at the factory itself, I would say it's far, far better to be in a village like this than in porter cabins and being paid wages. Anyway, they're not really terribly interested in assimilating. They have their own language and their own customs. Here, a few of the girls just photographing them there. Anyway, the picture which really sort of affected me most when I was there, the sight that affected me most, was this sight, and it's a woman taking, I think again it's a grandson, down into the woods. And there's something about the way this boy is just walking, the sort of innocent way he's going into the woods. He's going to help Granny chop some wood. You just feel the sort of spring in his step. It's a secure, comfortable life that's always going to be there. But of course, it was about to change completely. The bulldozers would have come in above his village. He would have moved. And that would be the end of that world for him. And that just because I had sort of a grandson about the same age, it just moved me terribly, because we want stability, we want safety for our children, we want them to be looked after, we want them to feel there's a future. And here, you know, the people were just prepared to just tear the mountain apart, and as I say, they would have had to leave their land completely. Anyway, just quickly going down again, just rather like this sight of the man with a million eggs on his motorbike. That's just India for you, you know, that's sort of the easiest way to do it, to take eggs on a motorbike, is stick them in front of you like that. Just something you see. And this again, I quite like, just the back of vehicles. There's always this blow a horn as you go by and all that. And it's very much the modern world of transport, but the actual motif there you can see is very much of a vision of old rural India. And this is what was happening really in that area, that the old rural India was about to change very, very fast. Now, just very quickly, the history was that as a result of inquiries by an Indian legal group working for the main government, they decided that what should happen is that they should not be allowed to take the bauxite out of the mountains unless the local people voted in favor of it. So they, I thought, rather bravely gave the local people, these not many more than about sort of 10,000 of them altogether, perhaps less, they gave them the chance to decide on the future they wanted. And quite likely they would say, well, you know, the mountains don't mean as much to us, not this new generation anyway. We want money from the aluminium company and all that. And so it was a tense time for those who were supporting the rights of the villagers. And in August of this year, they voted over 96% to stop the mining, and the hills, the Nirmgiri hills, will not now be destroyed. The bauxite will not be able to be mined, and this huge corporation worth billions is going to have to decide whether they want to continue producing aluminium there or move out of the area. So it is the most extraordinary David and Goliath story in which, in this particular case, David wins. Anyway, that's why I was there, say, to get some background for a story. And this really became, as I say, the story itself. And in the truth, I've used the center part of the story. It's very much what I saw there, with the names obviously changed to avoid my being sued. Anyway, thank you very much. That's the Nirmgiri Hills saga.
Michael, thanks very much. If you'd like to stay up at the podium, we have about 10 minutes for questions and answers. There are microphones around the room, so if you would raise your hand, someone will come over to you. Who would like to go first? Well, I do have a question while people are working themselves up. Did you try riding a moped with all those eggs?
Well, those of you who've seen my programs will know that I'm always set up by the director to do things which will be a disaster, mainly doing local tribal dancing. So I think if he'd seen a motorbike with, 144 eggs on it, he would have said, "Michael, have a go," and you've had the biggest omelette in the world somewhere near that level crossing.
Okay. Anyone in the room? Over here?
Hello.
Hey, Robin.
Hello.
Tara, I was just wondering, what was it that, why India? Of all the places you could have become fascinated with and made programs about, why did you start in India? I myself find it fascinating too.
Well, I say I wasn't looking at India particularly. It was a news item that was in the Geographical magazine about what was happening at in the Nirmgiri Hills with the mine there. I know I was expecting possibly to be, Brazil, South America, Borneo, anywhere where there's sort of big clashes of interest between, the original inhabitants and sort of the modern world. So it didn't really have to be India. But having said that, I always enjoy going to India. I think it's a place which is always, it delivers so much for you. It's not inscrutable at all. I mean, everyone was up to tell you, give you a bit of advice and all that. When we were filming in India, as Basil will remember, they would all come along and we'd be in a station and put the camera, and I'd be doing a piece to camera, and they'd come along and say, "Oh, no, you don't, this is not a good place. This is not a good place. You must put the camera there." Then you would see all 4 platforms all at once. And they would just come and help you out and give you a little bit of advice as to what you should do. And, you talk to somebody and you get some sort of information about the local temple. No, another man would say, "Don't talk to him, that is stupid. He does not know what he's talking about. I would tell you what to do." So I quite like that sort of interaction you get in India. And I'd never been to this part of India at all, so I was it didn't take me long to make up my mind to follow up that story.
Francis?
You obviously, wherever you go, you have this investigative relationship with the place that you are. I wonder if you've ever taken that same approach and applied it to the place where you live.
Well, I mean, not entirely, but I'm really interested in where I live and how things work there. actually, it's a rather interesting point, because where I live in London is an area which is sort of, it's an area of small, quite attractive little houses, built in sort of 1850s. And in the 1960s and 70s, the local government, Camden local government, decided on a big policy of comprehensive redevelopment. And they just compulsory purchased a lot of these quite nice little streets and knocked them down. And they had a 10-part plan. And our little area was in the 10th place they were going to go to. And by the time people had seen what they were going to build and what they were replacing the buildings with, there was a kind of outcry saying, you just can't do this. What's the point? These houses are well looked after. They're perfectly fine. People don't want to live in tower blocks, which, I mean, seems silly in Hong Kong, but in England there's still a great deal of a kind of fondness for the small 2 up, 2 down. Anyway, so they stopped, and our little area is still preserved. So you look around, and actually the dynamic of the area is quite interesting, because you see every form of redevelopment plan in London since the war, including leaving places alone. It's all there to see, and I'm quite interested in the dynamic of that. But in terms of filming where I live, I think that'd be quite difficult. I mean, the number of people who know me already, I think it would be just, oh, you're doing another where are you going this time? Finchley. Well, what about Borneo? They think I'd sort of lost my bottle. But I think it would be quite difficult. I think it'd be very, very difficult. But someone should do it. Maybe someone from India should do it. That's the thing. Come over. You get the Dongria Khan to come over and film it.
I don't need a microphone. I've got quite a loud voice apparently.
We need it for the.
We need it for the tape.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
sorry.
No, a loud voice is not enough. You've got to be.
I was just
we've got to
wondering-
get you taped. Yes.
I was just wondering, thank you, it was a very interesting talk and it's lovely to meet you. I was just wondering how much of the year do you spend travelling, and does your wife ever join you on any of your trips? Or your
Well, she
family,
doesn't.
your children, or your...
No, we don't take families on our trips, largely because, well, if you're a bank manager, you wouldn't take your wife along and sit her in the office till you'd finished, really. I mean, nor would my wife actually want to. She's not a particularly adventurous traveller. She likes going to somewhere, having a nice time, sitting down, and not having to climb a mountain or descend into a volcanic crater every 5 minutes. So no, the answer is that when we're filming, the fewer people we can take with us, the better. And we have a crew of about 7, and that means we can operate fast, we can operate fairly discreetly. But what I have done is I've filmed in places which have been rather wonderful, and have taken my wife back there for a holiday afterwards. So, yes, we do a little bit of travelling like that. But
A couple more questions over here.
Did you get a sense of the strength of the Naxalite terrorist movement and whether they're frightening the villages? Would they have had an input into the result of the vote, do you think?
Well, not directly, in the sense we didn't go to any villages where the Naxalites were operating, but certainly from my guide and from people he talked to, I was quite aware that they were quite a strong influence. They tend to take various little areas. It's not right across the state, but certainly up in the hills where they can operate sort of guerrilla tactics. They are still a presence, and they're quite feared in most of the places. And as I say, the year I was there, 2011, almost at the same time as I was doing this journey, the Indian Army started a policy. I can't remember, it was kind of green something. Anyway, it was a definite attempt to deal with the Naxalite problem once and for all. And the day after I left, about 35 of about 70 of the troops were involved in an ambush and were killed. So it's quite serious stuff. And there's still, just a couple of weeks ago, I saw on the website that there'd been clashes between the two, and Naxalites and army had been killed. So I think it is something which they can't really deal with. But I'm sure there are journalists here who might have covered the story and would know more about it. And it's quite fascinating.
Time for one more question.
Oh,
Hello.
I'm enjoying this.
Well, I hope you'll stay around for a while afterward.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I.
One more question from the floor, Elaine.
Thank you. When you take these stories back to the Royal Geographical Society, does it influence them in any way? Do they take up any of these campaigns?
No, I mean, to make it clear, I read about this in the Geographical magazine, which is not, it's sort of financed by the Royal Geographical Society, but I wasn't sponsored by the RGS to go there. I particularly didn't want to. I wanted to sort of find out for myself. But I did talks there later. They themselves don't run campaigns. They sort of provide the geography, the geographical background. But there's certainly a campaign called Survival International. I don't know if you know about them, and perhaps it's well worth looking at their website. They update on all these various things. They were extremely interested in the fact that I'd been there. I mean, there were various Indian sort of writers and celebrities who'd spoken on behalf of the threatened people, but I think I was the only person who'd actually gone there to see what was going on. And so Survival International were very interested indeed in what I'd done, and I've given a couple of talks for them because they are particularly interested in the survival of indigenous peoples. And in fact, Basil and I went to Brazil, our last trip, and there, of course, we saw what was going on in the rainforests in Brazil, where things are slightly more, have moved on a bit, that the local tribes there have been given a lot more influence, are allowed to own land and all that. But, you know, this inevitable question of is progress going to steamroller them in the end? How can a few thousand people protect themselves, keep their language, keep their way of life? And, I mean, the Dongria Con are fairly passive. As you can see, they're not particularly interested in enlisting with the modern world. In Brazil, there were tribes of only 800 people who were creating a dictionary to keep their language alive and all that. So they hope that whatever changes happen, their culture will still be intact and will be remembered, and they themselves will record it rather than outsiders coming in to record it, that's an interesting development, I think, for indigenous people, that they do play their own part in their protection.
I think we'll leave it on that note as it's gone 2 o'clock. Well, if you want to hang around for a while, I'm sure people have questions. Michael Palin, thank you very much. It's lovely to have you back in the club.
Thank you.
And from us at the FCC, a small gift to share with you, and have a lovely afternoon, everyone.